recorded. Okay, so first of all, I wish everyone present in this session a very good morning. I'm Ms. Aditi Murale and I'll be your moderator for this session. Today's webinar has been arranged on behalf of Mr. Justice Emil Pinsi, Environmental Law Chair of Maharashtra National University, Mumbai, with the help of our Chair Professor Dr. Anil Variat and Program Coordinator Ms. Gauri Rani and the entire team working for this chair. I would like to start off by sharing a few words about our university. Maharashtra National University, Mumbai, established under the Maharashtra National University Act 2014, is one of the premier national law universities in India. The Act sought to establish a legal institution in Maharashtra with the aim of imparting advanced legal knowledge and promoting society oriented research in legal studies. In furtherance of the same objective, the Justice Emil Pense Environmental Law Chair of MLU Mumbai was established by Mr. Justice Emil Pense Foundation. Since its inception, the team has been striving to create general awareness about the need for environmental protection and has been advocating for robust laws that can help curb the abuse of natural resources. I'm elated to share with you all that we inaugurated our first online panel discussion this month, and today marks our second session in pursuance of this awareness campaign undertaken by the chair. We have with us for this special occasion Mr. Stalin Dayanand, a staunch environmentalist and the director of prestigious Vanashakti NGO. Stalin sir is best known for his recent work in the fight to save R.A. Mir colony forests. He has also been instrumental in getting Mumbai its second wildlife sanctuary, that is the Thane Creek Flamingo Sanctuary. Stalin sir has been instrumental in protection of national natural resources in the city of Mumbai, and his fights for conservation include staunch opposition to the plan for the Navi Mumbai International Airport, a much as 90% of the site earmarked for its wetland. In 2009, the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai approached the central government for permission to convert 140 hectares of wetlands in the central suburb of Kanjurmarg into a dumping ground. Sir opposed the proposal with support from Maharashtra Pollution Control Board, and the court even passed an order against dumping garbage at Kanjurmarg. In 2010, he stepped up to save the forest in Sindhudurg district of Maharashtra. Sir is also closely familiar with the process of public interest litigations and has filed more than 24 PILs to this date. His legal battles include a fight to revive the Ullas River in Mumbai, the protection of mangroves in Thane and Sevri, the protection of wetlands in western Maharashtra, and keeping wildlife corridors in the Western Ghats safe from mining activities. Sir also holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Mumbai University and a postgraduate degree in business management. Today, he continues to dedicate to the cause of environmental protection relentlessly, and we remain in awe of his outstanding work in this field. Stalin sir, the entire team of Mr. Justil ML Pense Chair welcomes you to this session. Now, as we know that there are a large number of NGOs in India that are exclusively working for environmental protection, conservation, and awareness. NGOs are now playing an important role in framing the environmental policy, mobilizing public support for environmental protection, and protecting the endangered species. So, there's no doubt about the importance of the work that NGOs and civil society organizations have done so far for environmental conservation. And since you've been affiliated with Vanashakti and having previously worked at Conservation Act Trust, you have closely observed how this works. Sir, our audience would be very grateful to you if you could give us some insights into how this non-governmental intervention in environmental protection goes. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you, the college and staff of who has invited me for this program, the National Law University, and it gives me a lot of happiness to see so many young lawyers or law students who are interested in environment. So today I will run you through the work of NGOs, particularly Vanashakti, and how Vanashakti's work has impacted a lot of policies and made a lot of difference on the ground. I can't run through all of the cases. I've picked up a couple, two or three cases so that people can understand the challenges and the dynamics better. So with your permission, I need to share my screen, and I must thank Professor Varyat for this opportunity, so especially because he has called up, he has followed up and invited me. I'm happy to be here. Please allow me to share my screen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Is the screen visible now?
No, sir, we can't seem to see the screen yet.
I'm more familiar with Zoom, so this is a little difficult for me. No problem. Let's get it once again. I have to, yeah,
So
it
there'll be an
says,
option in the bottom right. It says present now. If you click on that, I think it'll do the work.
is it showing now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Was introduction.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is about Vanashakti. Vanashakti, which started in 2006, it was formed by a group of individuals who were very concerned about the issues of Forest Rights Act and how the forests were getting destroyed. This was way back in 2006. We've come a long way since then. From 2010 onwards, Vanashakti has picked up its activities and moved forward. We try to protect forests, wetlands, the wildlife corridors, habitats. We are more into habitat conservation. We don't believe in the species conservation because we believe that if the habitat is protected, the species will take care of itself. So we try to create awareness on the environmental topics, try and convey to people the importance of rivers, prevent mining in wildlife areas, and we basically try to work with forest dwelling communities so that we can get their support to protect, because unless they own it and they take care of it, it's difficult to monitor or protect in any way. So I have been with Vanashakti since 2010 and headed most of its, not, I had all its activities. We have a good team at Vanashakti which work with different, in different sectors of it. Primary objective is to build awareness among decision makers, to protect, to support conservation projects. We support assistance. We give assistance to NGOs and individuals who want to try and save or try and improve a habitat, and in every form possible, in form of technical expertise, legal expertise, our uh, our channels to contact the governments. We open up everything for everyone who wants to try and save the environment, basically empowering people with the knowledge and the resources to protect. This is a broad definition of whatever we do. There are so many cases, 25 or more cases which have been filed in the public interest litigations. And that is the part which gets most reported. But along with that, we have to environment education, we have community awareness, outreach, research, livelihoods programs, afforestation drives. We also make films. We have a theater group called as the Living Theatricals, where the village kids go around doing street plays in village, from village to village, spreading the message of conservation and local issues. We don't talk about the polar bears to them. We talk to students about their local biodiversity. We make them understand the importance of every component of that biodiversity around them. So in the left-hand corner where you see conservation, there are the Western Ghats, the coastal regulatory zone, the critical wildlife cases, the Are Colony Forest, the Dabil River, the Tungareshwar Sanctuary, the doctrine of public trust. This should be very interesting actually because sorry, sorry, excuse me. People believe that the government owns a lot of everything and the government can do what it wants. But we don't forget that all the government does is to administer under the public trust doctrine, which says that the state is only a custodian. It is not the owner of the natural wealth of a country. So we believe that, and for which we filed a case saying that rivers must be kept free from encroachments and people should be allowed to go to the river. People and animals have a right to the river and a clean river. That was one of the important cases which is still going on. We have managed to get wetlands listed out and recognized. In Maharashtra's, in the state's record books, you wouldn't find wetlands till 2013. It is after our PIL that wetlands got a recognition. Today, there are many areas which have been identified as wetlands, and the Honorable High Court has already banned all kinds of constructions on wetlands. That is one part. There's a case of Aranda Jeti, interstate creek, where illegally a port was sought to be made. And then the Ulhas River case, it's a monumental case, which I'll talk about. The Mithi River, the Bicholi River, the rain trees, the Wada tree felling cases. Gomti and Kukurel are in UP that our Lucknow chapter is dealing with. So we'll go on to the part of conservation. Now, when you talk of conservation and non-governmental organizations, you will find conservation is basically split into so many parts: education, awareness, outreach, ground intervention, liaising with the government. Means the people who government appoints certain NGOs to do certain work with communities, and then there are NGOs which empower communities. There are NGOs which help give sustainable livelihoods, like we do for bamboo artisans by helping them sell their products. Then there are policy influencers like research institutes, urban research institutes, or research institutes which help frame policies. You have research. When you talk of research, there is a lot of scientific research which is needed for conservation. The data is most important. There are many NGOs like BNHS and Wildlife Trust of India which are doing this research work. And finally, litigation. Now, if you see, these are all these sections or the different categories under which conservation is conducted. What sets us apart is that we are the only NGO probably which does all of this. You will find every other NGO doing part of this, but we have done all of it and we continue to do all of it. So when you talk of research, this is basically the most comfortable zone for any NGO, because then the government also helps you with funding, the colleges help you with funding. You can go around asking trusts for funding. Then you are basically trying to do some scientific work. It's very good. It's important. The data has to be gathered. So that is one of the most comfort zones for any NGO. If you find the research NGOs are sitting on crores and crores of rupees of funding. You have education NGOs which have rural education, urban education, literacy programs. You have community welfare programs and livelihoods, awareness for whom we will come and talk. But again, the question is anyone willing to grab the bull by the horn? Will any NGO step up and say, no, you can't destroy this area. This area is beautiful. It has a lot of biodiversity. It has a lot of water in it. So then that is the question. Where does that, who fills up those gaps? First of all, why do you need to conserve? What is the need for this conservation? We all live in a very world where we feel that we're very pretty comfortably placed. It's not so. Climate change is here. It's very real. It's knocking at our doors. There is sea level rise. Mumbai and Mangalore particularly are supposed to be very severely inundated in less than 20 years from now. We have desertification, which is again, the government of India has woken up to this and it is addressing this challenge. But earlier they were not bothered about it. But now they have realized that large parts of India are turning into deserts because of over exploitation of groundwater, the lack of recharge into the groundwater, lack of water in the rivers, extensive farming, all these things. You have deforestation. Deforestation, it's a big problem. We are losing forests at a very rapid rate. We have monoculture plantations now. If you see, forests are being replaced with palm oil and rubber plantations. And excessive farming and excessive use of topsoil have resulted in loss of fertility. That's one of the causes for desertification. You are losing wetlands and you're losing rivers. Wetlands are lands which are naturally wet for throughout the year or seasonally. But the fact is that there is a lot of wet soil there, which makes it a wetland. And the loss of rivers is a matter of concern. When you talk of climate change, this is what you can see in the future. These are rich, healthy paddy fields, which could turn into what you see on your right side. The seawater invading your land will cause this kind of destruction. This will cause urban migration. People will have to leave their villages due to sea level rise and go to other areas. You are creating a social shift, an socio-economic effect can be seen here. And when cyclones hit and when floods come, this is what it leaves in its aftermath. The poor are the ones who get hit the most, the ones who live off nature, the ones who live on the coast. Desertification, like I told you, it's an excessive depletion of groundwater and excessive use of fertilizers for farming, and the loss of rivers. And change in climate will cause less rainfall some places excess rainfall, both of which are dangerous. So you will have such situations. So you will find that large areas are becoming deserts. Now, deforestation, this is a huge issue. As we speak, let me tell you that with every second, you are losing 1 acre of forest. Every second. That is the rate at which we are losing a forest on this planet. And at the rate we are going, forest won't be able to, we may not see forest in the next 20 years. And the rate at which it is going on, it's like something like this, where you can see acres and acres getting deforested. Forests are making way. What you see are palm oil cultivations. The forests are on the top side. All of these are getting stripped and changed into cultivations. Now, these plantations draw water. They don't give water. Forests give you water. That's the basic difference we should understand. Forests and the rivers and the groundwater have a beautiful symbiotic relation. In the monsoon, the water is stored by the trees and by the soil, and in the summer season it gives it back to the river. And that's how this exchange continues. It's a beautiful relation. But when you substitute these forests, you only cause depletion. It's like constantly withdrawing from a fixed deposit. So today the state is that it is in a state of SOS. We need to move and intervene. Now we take a case. What happens? Why does this happen? See, the government has its own preset mind where it says development is important. So the nature is a collateral damage, which will damage to nature is collateral and it can happen. Now every problem we try to solve it using civil engineering. For example, if you say the river is getting polluted, you will put some kind of a filtration somewhere, or you will try and divert or create some other storage areas. You will create a reservoir. Then you clear forest and you plant some saplings somewhere. Where the earlier government said 33 crore saplings were planted in Maharashtra. I promise you, not even 1 lakh can be seen today. So that's the kind of mismatch. It basically creates a crisis, or it helps create an ecological crisis for industry, which really gets everything free. Everything you practically which the industry get is free today. The land, the water, the forests, everything. And then the government creates a multi-crore projects and then creates a crisis, and then under the guise of solving that crisis creates more problems. Let us take a case study. This is called the Dabil village. It's in Sindhudurg. These are photographs from the area, from the village. The forests of Dabil are among the best in the Western Ghats, as you can see here. This river, the Dabil river, flows throughout the year. It has absolutely no impurity in it. The best water you can get, and the beautiful forests that are there. These are the kind of forests that you see there. When you talk of forest, you should remember this composition is very important. Here you see the forest, it has vines in it, it has saplings in it, subadult trees in it, huge trees in it, and there are grasslands also in it. So this is it's a mixture of vegetation, and it's so dense that at some parts you can't even see the sunlight hit the ground. So it's very dense. Now this is a view from the village temple of the forest around it. And this village has 33 houses only. It's literally cut off from the rest of the world or the rest of Maharashtra's infrastructure. A very kacha road or a dirt road leads to this village, and they have lived there very happily with a certain amount of areas under farming. There are 34 households. Farming is the main occupation. The entire village at night, if you see, it's teeming with wildlife. Even in the daytime you can see it, but night is the best time to see wildlife here. The river originates and flows from here throughout the year. That's the beauty. Throughout the year is most important. People were leading very happy lives. All of a sudden, one day, they found some people surveying the lands. So they said, "What's happening? Why are you people here?" So they said, "We want to make a dam. We are making a reservoir, a huge reservoir." They said it's an irrigation project. Now, what was this irrigation project? It is supposed to submerge 700 hectares of forest and the entire village in it. And they said they wanted to promote irrigation. Really? In a rain plus surplus area where there's so heavy rainfall, you want to create a dam for reservoir for irrigation purposes? So then we kept getting repeated calls for help. And then we went down and we tried to find out what's the reason, what's happening here. So then we first went around understanding the issue, extensive visits to the region. We interacted extensively with the villagers. We went around the neighboring villages. The nearest village is about 3 kilometers away. Then we went and met the government on this, and we tried to convince them what's happening, don't do this. And we tried to encourage ecotourism in that area. We conducted our own biodiversity research because we saw the wildlife, but unless you document it, it wasn't going to be useful. So then finally we entered into litigation for this purpose. We said, why, what was our grounds for it? Then we realized that the project which was supposed to come up has concealed the presence of wildlife. It had shown certain villages, about 20 villages were shown as beneficiaries from this project. So we wrote to all of these villages and asked them, when did you ask for water from the government? In the last 20 years, 30 years, give us the records. All those panchayats wrote to us saying that we have not asked for water ever. So here the question came up, why then the government is saying that this is an irrigation project? When none of the villages which are supposed to benefit have asked for the water, why are they doing this? Water is something which no villager will sit quiet about. Every village, the sarpanch or the panchayat will pass resolutions. They will write to the government, to the Jilla Parishads and try and get water. But here nobody has asked for it. And here you want to submerge 700 acres of forest and a village with its temples, sacred groves, everything. Then we started researching for projects around the area. We came to know that the other side of the mountain, there's a village called Zolambe, where an iron ore mine was supposed to start. Then everything fell into place. Then we realized this was a project which was submerging for the forest so that water could be given for mining operations. And the beneficiaries were being shown as villagers. When we confronted the authorities with it, they denied anything of that sort. Then we went to the Zolambe mining reports. And we dug out and they said in the report that water needed will be provided from Dabil. So there they were cornered. And we are talking of a loss of tens and thousands of trees, maybe 50,000, 1 lakh or more of trees. 1 lakh is again a very conservative estimate. And the irrigation department and the government was justifying this destruction, saying that they would plant certain trees in Nanded. Now the Western Ghats and Nanded are like chalk and cheese. You can't remove the forests of Western Ghats and say we are going to do something somewhere else. So this was completely a complete fraud which was being played out. We finally approached the Honorable High Court of Bombay, filed a PIL. And mercifully, one of the finest judges in this country, I won't take any names, was hearing the case and he was shocked to see the irregularities in the project. And the bench immediately ordered a stay and pulled up the MOEF for trying to hide and not do its duty. It issued a stay order which continues even today for the last 7 years. So the court, I was very shocked to see the compensatory afforestation plans, and farmers at the result were very happy. They were celebrating and they are peaceful and happy today that their village is left in peace. They say, we don't want anything from the government, just leave us where we are in our village. We are happy here. We don't want any aid. We don't want any kind of help. So here you have self-sustaining communities who have maintained their forests being pushed into poverty through some kind of ridiculous planning meant actually for miners. Mining itself is an industry which is the most irresponsible industry in the whole world. It's not just in India. We can't find fault with us. Across the world, because they know very well what they are destroying is not replaceable and the loss cannot be compensated, but the money is so huge that governments across the globe allow them a free hand. So here in this case of Dabil, we had to do all these things: educating, scientific, legal research, advocacy, interacting with the governments, extensive use of RTIs, trying to keep people's morale up because they keep feeling depressed and sad. We'll tell them that let's keep fighting. We'll hope God is there somewhere. We'll try and do our best. That's all we can do. And there was so much of political pressure and threats we had to face from people who are associated with the mining industries. and also from the political class. First thing was to convince our lawyers about the entire facts, and because unfortunately that's an area which needs a lot of what you call help. Young lawyers today are not aware of the scientific and technical facts of it, because very few science students take up law. So that is another issue, and the lawyers fought their heart out in court, and we're grateful to them for that. This is about the critical wildlife habitats. It's a very controversial issue. People call us at times anti-tribals. No, it's not so. We have always said that tribals may live there, but they cannot clear more forests and keep expanding, because wildlife also needs certain space. Under the Forest Rights Act, there is a clause which says critical wildlife habitats, means that habitat which is most necessary for the survival of a species must be kept inviolate. Maybe it may be a national park, but maybe 10%, 15%, 30% of that park will be kept inviolate, where only the animals have their rights. When we talk of forest rights, we have not taken into account the main stakeholder, which is the wildlife, which cannot survive without the forest. We talk of everyone else. We talk of humans, we talk about government, we talk about irrigation, we talk about mining. Everyone becomes a stakeholder, including activists. But where is the wildlife? Who's representing them? Nobody. So we filed a case, and it is being heard in the Honorable High Court of Bombay. Around the national park also, we've asked for the eco-sensitive zone to be declared, and that's how the RA battle also got more weight into it. Today, the eco-sensitive zone around the national park has been notified. RA is declared as part of the national park's eco-sensitive zone. There are certain issues which we are trying to resolve as far as RA is concerned also. Now, all of us must be knowing about the Metro 3 car shed, a service station for washing railway bogies inside a forest at the loss of 4,000 trees, where there are two rivers and countless forms of wildlife. Fortunately, this government has taken good steps and has moved the car shed out of the place, because there are many other locations where this can be made. The actual purpose was to create real estate, because they brought a railway station inside along with it. And we knew that this was the beginning of the end of RA. If we don't fight it now, entire RA will be lost. And about 800 acres has been proposed to be notified as a reserve forest already. Here you won't believe, the government, the earlier government, used to send maps of RA forests to the Supreme Court of India. The Honorable Supreme Court was shown maps where only structures were shown. Only buildings, government institutions and buildings and slums were shown. They never bothered to show 5 lakh trees in it. They kept saying it is not at all a forest. Today, this government and the forest department has accepted that at least prima facie, on a very low scale, we can say safely that 800 acres of forest is there in Mumbai today. The fight is still on. There's a lot of political pressure on this. A lot of politicians who are into real estate who are trying to scuttle the efforts, but we are focused on it. We will try and see that maximum areas of RA get protected. These are the tribals who stood along with us and fought with us to save this RA forest. We ran the Mumbai Marathon, and we also participated in human chains. We tried and raised a lot of awareness on this RA issue. It's become a global name now today. The river restoration. Now Mumbai, the rivers of India make it unique. We are a land blessed with 400 perennial rivers. How many of us know this? 400 perennial rivers. We were occupied, ruled, oppressed, exploited only because we had water. This country has enough water for its people. That's the only reason, not for the gold and diamonds which we have been told. Because if that was the case, there is enough money everywhere else in the world also. But here, because there is enough water, invaders came in, chose to occupy and live here. The Ulhas River case. Now, Ulhas River case is a very historic case, because we fought it for almost now 7-8 years now. And it continues. And the challenges are immense, but still we managed to make good gains on this. It starts somewhere above Karjat in the hills here. Why is it so important? It is giving you drinking water for 25 million people at Navi Mumbai, Badlapur, Ambarnath, Ulhasnagar, Kalyan, Dombivli, Thane Municipal Corporation. It is a source of livelihood for millions of fisherfolk who use the river for fishing. There are migratory birds in it. It's an additional source of income. There is rich flora and fauna, and it's a source of seafood also. The river, when you talk of a river, the river doesn't end where it is sweet. The saline zone of the river and the estuary till it meets the sea is called the river. It's a complete composition. Now at Mangani, the river flows like this. It's very nice, clear water which you can see there. But this is a place, as it comes further down in Badlapur, the water is good. And then afterwards it gets very bad. I will show you some pictures on that. This is the issues of the river are mainly industrial pollution, where the discharge of untreated effluents is happening, and raw sewage, which was being sent by almost all the municipal corporations in its zone, sand excavation, discharging and from industries like from Ulhasnagar, jeans washing units, and tankers from outside the state also come and discharge their chemicals and poison into the Ulhas River. Areas like Chikloli, Morivili, etc., these kind of illegal activities happen. The frequency has reduced, but earlier it was very common to see it happening. And of course, garbage dumping is common across all rivers. Now, these are the people who pollute the rivers. We just like I said. Now, if you see here, this discharge point next to a railway track, this is an official MIDC discharge point. Can you believe an official legal MIDC is sending its industrial waste like this into the river near a railway track? And we are saying that we are on the path of industrial progress. What kind of progress are we talking about? Now, effluents from in Ulhasnagar, like I told you, there are many textile jeans washing units which are there. The sewage is going, raw sewage is going into it. Untreated effluents from, especially in Dombivli MIDC. Dombivli is declared as a critically polluted area. Critically polluted means where pollution levels have gone beyond any threshold, where you need serious decade-long restoration plans. But even today, they are not willing to fall in line. They are not willing to change. And in fact, they are aided very actively by the pollution boards. Now, this is the Valdhuni River. Just upstream here is the Railneer bottling plant, where water is packaged and given to the rail passengers. Don't worry, that water is good. It's clean. It is just that 500 meters from that spot, this kind of water is sent into the river. This is what is called the Khemani Nala. What you see on the right hand bottom side is raw sewage, untreated sewage from entire municipal corporation of Ulhasnagar. And on the left side, you can see a small building. That is the drinking water pumping station. The sewage from this side and drinking water from the other side on both sides of the river. That's how it is happening. That's the kind of water that is being supplied to people to drink. So what has happened? The groundwater has contaminated, the aquifers are contaminated, marine life is destroyed. Now you don't see any fish in that river now in many places. And when you consume the seafood in the from the estuary, then again those carcinogenic agents get into your body. Number of cases have gone up, respiratory diseases, digestive skin disorders. We've been asking for a study after we spoke to the local doctors who said, yes, it's very bad here, but the government refuses to conduct a study. And this is how the water is going into the river, this kind of water, directly. In fact, Dombivli even witnessed green rain because so much of chemicals which were in the air also came down in the form of acid when it rained last year. We filed a case in the NGT in 2013. The NGT imposed a 30 crore fine on industries, and totally a collective fine of 96 crores was imposed on everyone, everyone meaning the municipal corporations and the industrial MIDCs which were in that zone. The industries, instead of paying the fine, chose to go to the Honorable High Court of Bombay and obtain a stay order. The High Court gave a stay order, which we challenged in the Honorable Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court pulled up the industries and all the polluters. It stayed the High Court proceedings, took the matter into its own hands, and imposed a fine of 100 crores on the government. It's the first time in history of India that the government paid a penalty for polluting the river. 4 municipal corporations and MIDs were indicted, and they were asked to pay the fine, and the fine was paid. Only the Dombivli Industries Association has managed to keep legal proceedings going, and we are still continuing to pursue it. Now, what is the legal environment today? The judiciary and the bar. we have our experience with the judiciary has been a mixed one. We've had some fantastic judges who were so sensitive and who stuck to the rule book. They told the government whenever it came up and tried to justify illegality, saying that your helplessness cannot be a reason to violate the law. You don't give us. I'll give you one. What context it was said? It was said when the question of the Kanjurmarg dumping ground, which is a 141-hectare open garbage, which is lying in the open and rotting and stinking and polluting. The municipal corporation of Mumbai responded to the court saying that if you stop us from using the ground, we will not pick up the garbage from tomorrow. So it was literally blackmail, to which the judges said, you can't do this. There is a law for municipal solid waste handling. You need to adhere to that. That's all we are saying. So we have certain cases like that, and certain cases where we found that judges were absolutely saying, no, no, we need development. These are all incidental. So our primary question is, in matters of technical importance, where I have technical issues, we feel that the judiciary must refer it to independent scientific experts and then pass an order based on their inputs. Because, see, for example, an engineer cannot speak on medical issues, just like a doctor cannot speak on engineering issues. So where we need expertise, a technical expertise, the judiciary needs to look into that. If the issue is complicated, if it involves matters of science and technicalities, it has to consult. But sometimes very rarely they do it. And wherever they have done it, we've found that it has helped, except certain institutions which are, I won't name them, to maintain their funding from the government, they don't give you reports which are factual, because their own funding will be hit. So they always give clean chits to many violators. Now, what happened to the NGT? Starting 2017 onwards, it went into limbo. There were no appointment of any kind. The judges were absent. The Western bench shut down. How can an institution shut down? And for 3 years, people had no clue what to do with their cases. We had to move many of our cases to the Delhi bench. And what happens in the Delhi bench is another story altogether. As you grow, when you step into the courtroom your first time, you see it as a temple of justice. You want everything to be copybook, but you will see that it doesn't happen always. And we have to be prepared for those kind of shocks where you don't get justice, you have to keep pursuing it. And one day the case has to come up before a judge who is serious to dispose it of. The pendency in the courts is a huge challenge. In matters of environment, you cannot have pendency, because you're talking of a damage which is larger damage for nature, for mankind, for animals, for the country. So you cannot have long dates on environmental matters. I believe environment matters should be settled in certain time frames. Any case which is an environment matter must be resolved in a particular case. Maybe hearings can happen faster. For example, the Kanjurmarg dumping ground case has been going on for a decade now. There are 4 matters which are actually all open and shut cases, but not a single hearing. Not a single hearing has happened. Hearing in a manner where it needs to be disposed of. If someone picks up one issue and gets an order, and then we have to challenge that order in the Supreme Court reverses the High Court order, then we come back to the High Court, then again it starts, the cycle goes on and on and on. So you as law students need to be prepared for the long haul when you enter this. Now, what is the need of the hour? It's GDP minus biodiversity. We say it's an oxymoron. You cannot talk of sustainable development. That term itself is absurd. You haven't learned to sustain. How will you develop? When you talk of sustaining, it means you have missed out on earlier years. You could have done something better. You didn't do it. And now you still want to continue on that path and say, no, we are doing sustainable development. Sustainability has not been defined. It has not been achieved. So I'm not saying stop development. I'm saying at least future developments have to be in a manner where you can visibly demonstrate that you spent the money needed to protect and improve the environment alongside your projects. And we talk of awareness. A lot of people say more awareness is needed. Our question is, who needs the awareness? The people know it. The school children know it. Greta Thunberg is a school kid. There are many Indian school kids who are doing it. They are telling the governments, wake up. These climate change is knocking at our doorstep. We are the children who are going to suffer. So who needs awareness? It's the government machinery that needs awareness. Now, if you go and talk to any government official, you will find the level of ignorance or the level of lack of understanding is dismal. You can't believe the way they are disconnected from the environment. Every citizens movement is not an opposition to development. It is constructive criticism. It is helping the government to relook and redesign and redo the projects they want to do. So people's needs, does the government ever come and ask you what you want? No. They come and tell you, this is a project we brought for your good. You have to do it. Now you have to accept it. So that projects are basically driven by developers, and the job of the government is to sell it to you. And they try to sell it to you, mask it under certain kinds of rhetorics. Like they said in RA, we are cutting down 4,000 trees, but we have planted 25,000 saplings in the national park. We went and showed that not even 200 are remaining on the ground there. So those kind of cover-ups are done, and people are never taken into confidence. Now, how many parliamentary debates have you seen on environment in the last 7 years? Has anyone seen anything? How many new laws have been made to strengthen the existing legislations? In fact, the approach has been completely contrary. They are saying we need to dilute the laws. We need to dilute the laws, the ease of doing business. We have been doing ease of doing business for the last 7 years. Has it improved our economy? Or has it impacted our environment? Yes. Has it improved our economy? No. So what? Something is fundamentally wrong. So a rhetoric cannot substitute the fact and the truth on the ground. We need to ask our lawmakers for better laws. No dilution. The draft EI notification, which is supposed to attain finality, has been challenged by a record number of people. The environment minister got 8 lakh emails. 8 lakh emails. So much so he ordered that the websites which are forwarding those emails should be shut down. And they were shut down. After which legal notices were sent and the process started, and then they withdrew the ban. So every kind of feedback is sought to be discredited and brushed aside. We are in a situation today that we have to be tuned in with the realities of conservation today. NGOs have very big role to play, but those NGOs cannot survive without public support, without public donation, without public funding. We have been always struggling for funds, always. The reason being that we don't accept the strings that come along with donations. People tell us, institutions tell us, we'll give you work, we'll give you project. Government tells us, we'll give you projects. But then you will not speak against us. We are not speaking against anyone. We are telling the truth to the government. We are telling the government, please listen to or understand the issues on the ground and help us save whatever biodiversity remains today. Today, see, nobody is talking of economic growth because we are all running for our own survival. COVID-19 has put us in place. And what is COVID-19? It's a zoonotic virus which has come out from wildlife. When we move into wildlife areas, when we clear the forests, when we allow wildlife to interact with us, then we are inviting disaster. They are carriers of viruses, and viruses are here to keep us in check. If nature decides it just snaps its fingers, we will be out of the equation. We need to learn our lessons. We need to work for conservation. And money, economy without environment is a no-brainer. That's my message to all of you. I'll be happy to take questions on this, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much, sir, for this insightful session. We do have a lot of questions in the chat box. If you permit, I can read some of them.
Please do. I will be happy to answer each and every question.
Yes, sir. There's a question that says, sir, with the increase in population of metro cities, how can we ensure that we can achieve a balance between development and environment protection?
See, when you are talking of population pressure on metro cities, yes, it's a serious concern, which means you have to have better public transport infrastructure. And better public transport infrastructure cannot be expensive. Government needs to invest in affordable and efficient and comfortable public transport. And when we talk of Mumbai, a city like Mumbai, it has so much of forests and wetlands in it. So the FSIs or the constructions can go high rise. We never have a problem with that. But don't go into natural areas. So that is the way of developing. When you create an efficient, now let us talk about the metro. Metro, yes, it's a modern way of transport. People are using it. People feel happy using it. But ever since the pandemic has started, all metros are shut wherever they are. They are not allowed to operate. So it's not something which you can rely on in a medical emergency. But consider see the fact who is running today. Who is helping the people reach their place of work? It's the BST. What has the government invested in the BST? Zero. How many new buses have come in? No, they have taken mini buses on contract. Imagine dedicated bus lanes in Mumbai or any city of Mumbai where public transport, air conditioned or beautiful high quality, where comfortable buses are running end to end without stops, without breaks in the journey. Uh, so that will create the pressure on the car owners to stop using their cars. But if you're going to create more roads and allow more cars to come in, you're only letting the problem multiply. So we can always develop, if we use a right balance, we need to use it in the planning stage. Now we have, let us see how many, almost 1 lakh crores we are spending on metro projects, and we are not willing to spend 100 crores for BMC, for the BST buses. So that mismatch cannot continue. Today we need to have a balance of everything. We should have all the options given equal priority. Housing, yes, affordable housing is a need of the hour today, and the slums should be relocated vertically and create land for the city, not go into new areas, new wetlands, new forests and say, okay, no, now we have no space, so we are going into these areas. So those kind of arguments do not hold good. See, the problem is the government has passed on the responsibilities on to private entities. That is the modern way of governance. That creates the conflict. So we cannot change it overnight. Next.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. There's one more question from Ms. Yadav. So, where to go when any environmental issue arises? If you don't have any environmental NGO in your area, I am from Silvassa.
Okay, you have to write to Silvassa, I believe, is a union territory. So you have to write to the administrator there, the LG, whoever is handling that area. There will be a pollution control board there. Emails are available. You have to put it on, send it to the Ministry of Environment and Forest. The principal secretary is there. All these emails are there. You copy one email, you write one email and copy all of these people on that email and keep your complaint on record and wait for 30 days. And after 30 days, you send an RTI saying that what action has been taken on my complaint dated so and so. You will find that things are moving. They will either come back and say they are investigating it. Fine. If they're investigating it, then you write back and tell them, I want an answer as soon as it is done. Then again, after 10 days, send another RTI. Keep the pressure on and don't get scared. You'll get some phone calls or someone will threaten you. Don't get scared. Nobody can, this is not Somalia. This is India. It's not so easy to kill people or hurt people. So don't get worried about that, but you have to put your complaints on record. And in case you are too scared to do that, at least you can gather the data and send it to the NGOs which are working in that area. If nobody is doing anything, please compile it and send it to us. We will try and see what we can do.
Thanks for the answer, sir. There's one more question which asks why is that crimes defined under environmental laws are not considered as grave as conventional crimes by corporations and also by general public?
Because this, again, like I said, it's a lack of ownership. We think what is being destroyed is government property. We don't see it as our property. Many times I am questioned, or my organization, my people are questioned कि तुम्हारा है क्या, तुम क्यों कर रहे हो? We say yes, it is mine. The river belongs to me. If you must know, I am the owner of it, and you will stay out of it. You will not come here. That should be our approach. When you give up your ownership, when you give up your claim, you won't give up your claim for a one-room house in the city. What are you giving up your claims for? So when your ownership starts, when you see it as your property, nobody can touch it. And the lack of understanding is that there is this principle which the government keeps perpetuating, is that development must happen. Development must happen. This will happen. We will plant some sapling somewhere. Every answer for destruction is sapling. Saplings are not trees. If that saplings are equal to trees, then the bureaucrats and the minister should be substituted with kindergarten kids and say, okay, 4 kindergarten kids will do their job. It doesn't happen. So people, to change things, we will have to own up to them. It starts with the ownership, feeling of having value to it. And that will have to come through you people, the youngsters of today, the law students of today. And that when you argue aggressively and passionately with scientific facts on your ground, things will change.
Thank you, sir. There's one more question. Would it be possible for India to adopt the model of, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, a city of Azerbaijan in order to tackle environmental pollution and keep the cities clean. I'm not sure what the model is, but if you know about it, please go ahead
Even
and
I
answer.
wouldn't, I am also, I must confess, I don't know much about it, but I believe that it can never be a case of one size fits all. For example, Mumbai. Mumbai's main issue, if you ask me, is air pollution and garbage, handling of garbage. Now, when garbage is mixed and sent to the dumping ground, it will just rot there for years. And the Maharashtra Prevention of Non-Degradable Garbage Control Act very clearly, strictly prohibits mixing of garbage. This is a beautiful piece of legislation passed in 2006, and it provides for imprisonment of the municipal corporation officers if they don't segregate the waste. Now we have beautiful laws, and if Mumbai segregates its waste, the quantum of waste that will go to the dumping ground will be minimum. But the corporations and the contractors resist it because more the volume, more the money. So we have to understand that citizens also have a role to play. So the Azerbaijan model, I'm not aware of it, but I believe every city can have its own what you call conservation model, and that can happen with scientific NGOs and the social sector NGOs working together and coming out. And there are NGOs which are doing it.
Since we have so many questions, we'll be shortlisting some of them. Rest of these questions will be emailed to Stalin sir, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer those. I take the last question, which says local corporations often found to violate public trust doctrine. How to handle such problems?
We are left with no option. The constitution casts a responsibility on us to protect, so we have to go to the court, just as the constitution tells the government to safeguard the forest and protect the wildlife. We have to step up, we have to go to the courts. And in the courts, like I tell you, it's not as easy as we think. People always tell us, go to court, go to court. But go to court again, it's a very, very, very difficult task to get a judge to hear it who is sensitive towards the environment and who's not biased, because we found many judges talk about sustainable development in their judgments. The term sustainable development is not understood and it is used very loosely. If we want, we can save every bit of biodiversity and still have all our projects. So it is left to the judiciary. In fact, whatever is remaining today in India, whether it is forest or the environment, it is solely because of the judiciary. The government on its part, whether it is the Congress government or whether it is the BJP government or whichever government was in power, had really no connect with the environment. Of course, the exception would be Dr. Jairam Ramesh, who was probably India's only serious environment minister, who was very clear that the mandate of the ministry is to protect. As law students, let me ask you one question. Under which law does the government or the court permit destruction? There is no law which allows you to do it. Under which provision of the law are you doing it? The law tells you to protect, you cannot destroy. So the balance is always tilted in favor of conservation, but the implementation is the reverse. So as law students, I would look for you all to research and tell me which law allows the government the power to destroy.
Thank you so much for that insightful session, sir. We have a lot of questions. I can see a lot of people texting me about their questions. I'm sure I'll mail your questions to Stalin, sir, and I'll get the replies and I'll get back to you on this. Since we do not have a lot of time, I would like to invite one of our joint conveners, Miss Anushka Singh, for the vote of thanks. Over to you, Anushka.
Thank you, Aditi. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Dayanand for such a fruitful session. So, we're very fortunate to have you share your knowledge and experience with us. The dedicated work done by Vanashakti towards habitat protection and environment education is truly inspiring.
Thank
In
you. Thank
addition,
you.
I would like to thank you, sir. In addition, I would like to thank MNLU Mumbai's Vice Chancellor Professor Dr. Dilip Uke and our Registrar Professor Dr. Anil Varyat, who's also our Chair Professor. Their constant support and encouragement in holding these webinars is sincerely appreciated. Thank you to Ms. Gauri Rani, our Program Coordinator, and Ms. Aditi Morale, our wonderful moderator. Last but not the least, thank you for everyone who joined us today. It's a wonderful Sunday morning, and I hope everyone had a productive session and learned about the importance of habitat conservation. conservation and the legal environment surrounding it. Please note that the feedback form will be shared with you shortly, either on the chat box or on email. Do remember to fill it, as you will receive your certificate of participation on the basis of filling this form. The certificate will be issued to you within 1 week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anushka. I once again ask all the participants to